Welcome back to another deep dive. Today, we are tackling a monster of a topic. It's one of those ideas that's so deep in our culture, in movies and angry social media threads that you just assume it has to be true. I'm talking about greed is good?
It's the Gordon Gekko philosophy,
Yeah.
right? The idea that the whole capitalist system, the economic air we breathe, is built on this foundation that if everyone just acts selfishly, society somehow magically wins.
Exactly. And there's always one name that gets attached to this whole idea, Adam Smith, the father of capitalism, the guy on the 10-pound note. The story always goes that Smith came up with the invisible hand just to justify, unbridled avarice.
But today, we are going to completely flip that script. We've got a text here called Puss ASO, which kind of translates to, well, that, and it's basically a rescue mission.
It really is. Our mission for this deep dive is to rescue Adam Smith's reputation from what turns out to be a massive historical mix-up.
And we're not just clearing his name, we're also going to trace a fatal math error Smith made. A literal calculation mistake that actually paved the road straight to Karl Marx.
Okay, and the plot twist I'm most excited about is how a group of Spanish monks living in the 1500s somehow solved the economic puzzle of value 200 years before Smith even got started.
And of course, we're going to talk about a pencil.
A pencil.
Just a regular yellow #2 pencil. And I promise you, by the end of this, that pencil is going to completely blow your mind.
All right, I'm sold. Let's jump in. Let's start with the big myth, the invisible hand. When people use that term, they usually mean the market fixes everything because greed drives progress. But what does the source material actually say?
Well, the source starts by pointing out something a little uncomfortable. Most people who criticize Adam Smith have never actually read Adam Smith. They see him as this heartless figure who didn't care about human suffering. But here's the thing. Before he wrote The Wealth of Nations in 1776...
It's a famous one.
Right, the famous one. He wrote a book in 1759 called The Theory of Moral Sentiments.
And I think the assumption most people make is, oh, so he must have changed his mind. He was a nice guy in 59 and then became a cynical economist by 76.
That's the assumption, yeah. But the source argues he absolutely did not change his mind. The invisible hand actually shows up in both books. And in The Theory of Moral Sentiments, Smith explicitly writes that nature gave us a desire to please others and, an aversion to offending them.
So he's basically saying we're hardwired for empathy.
He calls it sympathy, but yeah, essentially. He argues that even the most selfish person has principles that make them interested in the fortune of others, even if they get nothing from it but the pleasure of seeing it.
That doesn't sound like a guy preaching greed is good.
Not even close.
It sounds more like a social philosopher than a corporate raider. So if he believes in empathy, how does that fit with the invisible hand? Because that's the part everyone gets stuck on.
This is where we have to be really precise with our language. Smith isn't talking about selfishness. He's talking about self-interest. And the source makes a huge, huge distinction between the two.
Okay, let's unpack that. Self-interest versus selfishness. Because to a lot of people, they sound pretty similar.
They do, but the intent is completely different. The source gives a great example. Think about an older person saving money for their retirement. They're acting in their self-interest. They want to be secure, not a burden. Is that selfish in a bad way?
No, of course not. They're not hurting anyone.
Exactly. And that capital, they save, it gets invested, it helps companies grow, create jobs. Or look at a business owner. A smart shopkeeper treats her employees well and makes sure her customers are happy. Why?
Because she wants them to come back. And for her employees to stick around.
Right. It is in her self-interest to be fair, to be honest, to be reliable. If she's a selfish jerk, if she cheats customers or abuses her staff, she'll go out of business. So the market actually forces you to consider other people's needs to satisfy your own.
That reminds me of that famous quote about the butcher and the baker.
It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest.
See, I've always heard that read in a really cynical tone, like, don't trust the butcher, he's only out for himself.
But the source argues Smith is saying the complete opposite. He's saying, isn't it amazing that you don't have to rely on the butcher's charity to eat? You can rely on the fact that he needs to make a living. It turns the transaction into a partnership. You get meat, he gets paid. It's cooperation, not predation.
Okay, so if Smith wasn't the guy running around saying vice is virtue, who was? Because that idea that being bad is actually good for the economy is a real philosophy. It didn't just appear out of thin air.
No, it didn't. And this is where the history gets a little bit like a soap opera. The real villain here or at least the guy who actually wrote what everyone thinks Smith wrote, is a man named Bernard Mandeville.
Mandeville, I've never heard of him.
Most people haven't. He was a Dutch writer who lived about 18 years before Smith was even born. He wrote a book called The Fable of the Bees. And Mandeville, well, he did not mince words. He was a provocateur.
And what was his argument?
His tagline was literally, private vices, public benefits. He explicitly argued that things like fraud, luxury, pride, envy, that these are the actual pillars of a wealthy society.
Wow.
His view was that if everyone suddenly became moral and stopped sinning, the economy would collapse because nobody would buy anything, nobody would hustle, and we'd all just be poor.
That is incredibly dark. That is literally greed is good.
It is. He basically said, stop complaining about corruption because corruption makes the wheels turn. Now, here's the kicker. Adam Smith knew about Mandeville.
Oh.
And he absolutely hated him.
He hated him.
Couldn't stand the guy's ideas. In The Theory of Moral Sentiment, Smith calls Mandeville's system absolutely pernicious and wholly inconsistent with truth. He spent a good part of his career trying to refute the very idea that you need vice to have prosperity.
So it's a massive historical irony. We've been blaming Adam Smith for the exact philosophy he spent his life fighting against.
Exactly. It's a case of mistaken identity that's lasted 250 years.
Okay, so we've cleared Smith's name on the moral front. He's not the villain, but the source material takes a turn here. It suggests that while Smith wasn't a villain, he wasn't perfect either. In fact, it argues he made a technical error, a math mistake, that caused a lot of trouble down the line.
Trouble is putting it mildly. This is where we get into the weeds of economic theory, but stick with us because this explains the last 2 centuries of political conflict. Smith ran into a problem he couldn't solve, the paradox of value.
This is the classic water versus diamonds thing, right?
Right. It drove him crazy. He couldn't figure out why water, which is essential for life, I mean, you die without it, is virtually free, but diamonds, which are basically useless shiny rocks, cost a fortune. It just didn't make sense to him.
So how did he try to solve it?
He tried to calculate a natural price for things. He figured the value must be objective based on the stuff that went into making the object. Rent, capital, and most importantly, labor.
The toil and trouble.
Exactly. He essentially said, if it takes 2 hours to hunt a beaver and 1 hour to hunt a deer, then 1 beaver should be worth 2 deer. He used labor as his measuring stick. He didn't mean for it to be the only factor, but he was clumsy about it. He enshrined labor as the core component of value.
And then I'm guessing that clumsiness had consequences.
Massive consequences. This idea, the labor theory of value, it got passed down. It went to David Ricardo, who tightened it up, and eventually it landed on the desk of a young radical named Karl Marx.
Oh boy, I see where this is going.
Marx looked at Smith's definition and said, okay, let's take this seriously. If Adam Smith says value comes from labor, then why are the capitalists and the landowners getting paid? Marx took Smith's equation, stripped out the land and capital parts, and concluded that labor is the only legitimate source of value.
So, because Smith couldn't explain why diamonds were expensive without citing how hard it was to dig them up,
Right.
Marx was able to argue that any profit a business owner makes is actually theft.
Precisely. That's the concept of plusvalia, or surplus value. Marx argued that if a worker makes a chair that sells for $100 and he gets paid $50, the other $50 is stolen by the capitalist. The source argues that this entire theory, the foundation of class struggle, of communism, stems directly from Smith's initial mistake in defining value.
So Smith built a house with a crooked foundation, and Marx moved in and turned it into a fortress.
That's a great way to put it. And the real tragedy is Smith didn't have to make that mistake. The source points out that the solution to the diamond water paradox was already out there, just waiting to be found.
This is the part that surprised me most. The solution didn't come from another economist in London. It came from Spain, 200 years earlier.
Enter the School of Salamanca.
The Spanish monks.
Spanish monks. We're in the 16th century, the golden age of Spain. And these weren't guys in an ivory tower looking at charts. They were confessors. They were hearing confessions from merchants who were terrified they were going to hell.
Why were they so worried?
Because they were selling things for a profit. They'd come into the confessional and say, Father, I bought this soap for 10 coins and sold it for 15. Am I greedy? Is this a sin? What is the just price?
And what did the monks tell them?
They applied rigorous theological logic. They looked at how humans actually behave. And they realized something profound. Value isn't inside the object. It's not about how hard you work. Value is inside the person looking at the object. It's subjective.
Subjective, so it's about how much I want it.
They called it estimation. The source quotes them comparing a pearl to grain. They said the just price of a pearl is greater than the just price of a great quantity of grain, even though the grain is more useful,
Why?
because men esteem the pearl more.
It's just supply and demand.
It is supply and demand, discovered by monks in the 1500s. They concluded that the just price is simply the market price. As long as you aren't committing fraud or, coercing people, whatever price the market bears is the moral price.
That is incredibly modern.
It's basically the marginal utility theory, but centuries early. If Smith had known about this, or if he hadn't, as the source suggests, ignored or vampirized it, he might never have gone down that labor theory rabbit hole.
And Marx wouldn't have had his primary weapon. That's a huge what if for history.
It really, really is.
Okay, so we've cleared Smith on greed, but we've indicted his math. Now let's talk about the thing he actually got right, the invisible hand. The source mentions a weak versus a strong version of this idea.
Right, and this is a crucial distinction. The strong version is the straw man that people like to attack. It's the idea that the invisible hand makes the market perfect, that there are no failures, no one loses a job, everything is a utopia.
Which no serious person actually believes.
Right, that's a fantasy. But the weak version, which the source claims is the true one, is that the invisible hand creates a system that is simply more just and more efficient than any attempt to centrally control the economy. Not perfect, but it's better than the alternative.
And to prove this, we have to talk about that pencil you mentioned at the start. This comes from an essay called I, Pencil by Leonard Reed.
Yes. If you haven't read it, you should. It's written from the perspective of the pencil itself. And the opening line is a complete showstopper. Not a single person on the face of the earth knows how to make me.
Which sounds ridiculous. I mean, I'm holding a pencil right now. It's wood, graphite, a little metal band, an eraser. I feel like if you gave me a weekend and a workshop, I could probably figure it out.
You really couldn't. Let's just try to trace the genealogy of this thing. Start with the wood. It's cedar from, let's say, Northern California. To get that wood, you need a saw. To make the saw, you need steel. To get the steel, you need to mine iron ore. To move the logs, you need trucks, which means you need rubber, engines, glass.
Okay, I see your point. Just getting the wood involves thousands of people.
And we're just on the wood. The logs go to a mill in San Leandro. The mill runs on electricity. So you need the concrete dam that generates the power. You need the hydro engineers who designed it. And we haven't even touched the lead.
Which isn't lead.
Right, it's graphite.
Right.
Mined in Ceylon, modern-day Sri Lanka. Then it's shipped across the ocean. Then it's mixed with clay from the Mississippi River. Then it's treated with, get this, whale fat or other animal fats.
Okay, my head is spinning. Mississippi clay and Sri Lankan graphite.
Wait, we're not done. The eraser. It's not just rubber. It's a substance called factus. It's made by reacting rapeseed oil from the Dutch East Indies, that's Indonesia, with sulfur chloride, and the pumice that makes it erase, that comes from Italy. And the little metal band, the ferrule, that's brass, zinc and copper.
It's the United Nations of materials in a 10-cent object.
It is. But here's the mind-blowing part. The miner in Sri Lanka. He doesn't know the logger in Oregon. The chemist in the paint factory doesn't know the truck driver hauling the clay. They don't speak the same language. They have different religions. They might actually hate each other if they ever met.
But they're all cooperating.
They are cooperating flawlessly. And here is the key. There is no pencil czar.
No mastermind.
No mastermind. There's no government official in some high-rise saying, okay, you ship the graphite now, and you ship the rapeseed oil now. It all happens spontaneously.
That is the invisible hand.
That is it. It's millions of tiny bits of know-how coming together.
Right.
The president of the pencil company, he contributes a tiny fraction of the knowledge needed. The miracle is that the price system coordinates all this complexity without anyone giving orders.
It really is a miracle when you think about it. The source calls it faith in free people. But this leads to the obvious question. If the market is so good at coordinating millions of people to make pencils, what is the government for?
The source takes a classical liberal view on this. If the invisible hand works for production, the state shouldn't try to steer the economy. The state is the referee, not the quarterback.
So preventing violence, stopping theft.
Exactly. Enforcing contracts, stopping monopolies, specifically those created by political power. But the source is very firm on this. The state should not be in the business of redistribution of wealth.
Now, that's a touchy subject. Does the source say we should just let people starve?
No, and it's careful to make that distinction. It argues that helping the poor is a moral obligation. It calls it a grave precept. But it cites Pope Pius XI to say that this belongs to the sphere of conscience and charity, not state coercion.
So the argument is that charity should be voluntary.
The argument is that when the state forces redistribution, it inevitably leads to corruption, to injustice, and inefficiency. It turns what should be a moral act into a bureaucratic one.
Speaking of bureaucracy, the source has one final analogy that I found pretty brutal. The comparison between mail and oil.
Oh, this one stings. It's from the pencil story. The author points out that private companies can get oil from the Persian Gulf, put it on a tanker, ship it halfway across the world, refine it, and deliver it to your local gas station.
And they do this incredibly cheaply.
They do it for less money per pound than the government charges to deliver a letter to your neighbor across the street.
Ouch. That really puts it in perspective.
It's meant to. It highlights the difference between the mastermind of a government monopoly and the spontaneous cooperation of the market. When you let the know-hows flow freely, you get cheap energy. When you try to control it from the top down, you get the post office.
So let's wrap this up. We've covered a lot ground today.
We really have.
Yeah.
We rescued Adam Smith from the greed myth. He wasn't Mandeville. We fixed his math, thanks to those Spanish monks. And we proved the power of spontaneous cooperation with a humble pencil.
It really changes how you look at the objects around you. You look at your phone, your coffee cup, your chair, and you realize you're just surrounded by millions of invisible handshakes.
It's a web of cooperation that spans the entire globe.
So here's the thought we want to leave you with today, and it's a big one.
If it takes the combined spontaneous knowledge of millions of people to create something as simple as a pencil, and if no single human brain on Earth can contain all that knowledge, why do we still believe that a single mind, like a government planner, can successfully direct an entire economy?
Something to think about the next time you sharpen a pencil. Thanks for diving deep with us.
See you next time.